Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, July 21st, 2002 Scarborough Board of Education workshop. May I have the attendance, please?
Sure. Mrs. Giftis,
She's excused.
Mr. Kelleher,
He's excused.
Miss Leong,
Here.
Mrs. Lindstrom,
Here.
Mr. Peony Huff,
Here.
Mrs. Turner,
Here.
Miss Bertulia,
Here.
and Mr. Shumway.
He's excused. All right, will everybody join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, agenda item 4.0 is our workshop, and 4.1 is student surveys, student privacy, and online data management. So at this time, I will turn it over to Jennifer Day and Monique Colson.
Okay, usually there's some place where I hit the key and so I'm kind of center where I kind of go over pretty late. You like to? I do. I need to roll. I think you need to. You need to. Oh, really? Okay, I kind of pointed over here, so is that, I don't know, our people in the booth, is that good? Peter? Don't know. Okay. Oh, it's good. Okay. Okay, but I do like to roam around, so I'm hoping he's going to tell me if he can't hear me. So I'm Jen Day. I am the director of IT. Our department, I think, as you guys know, oversees IT for both the school department and the town. So data privacy, period, not just student data privacy, but data privacy and data security are really important to our department because we're custodians of a lot of data for the entire town. Next slide, please. So a couple of the things that we're going to talk about, I figured we probably should start off. I'm going to give you a very 40,000 foot high level overview of kind of student data privacy, including the ABCs of student data privacy. So FERPA, COPA, SIPA, PPRA, all those different acronyms and kind of what they mean. And talk a little bit about what exactly student data privacy is, because I think we kind of throw that term around a lot, and I don't think we ever really sort of think about what it really means. And then we're going to talk about a couple of other things, what we do in Scarborough. Then I'm going to turn it over to Monique, and she's going to get into some of the really specific ways that we collect data and kind of what we do with it. So student data privacy versus data security. And as I mentioned, we'll talk about FERPA, PPRA, SIPA, COPA. Next slide. Data security. So data security versus data privacy. I think a lot of people kind of mash these two things together, but the way I think about this is data security is really sort of the tactical piece of maintaining data. So how the physical and the virtual, protecting it from the physical and virtual threats. So this means you hear a lot about malware, you hear a lot about phishing, spam, etc. It's all of that. It's protecting your virtual data, so data that's stored on servers, in your email, in the cloud, but also physical, right? Because you'll see, people have locked filing cabinets. We have something called the clean dust policy, so you don't leave social security numbers, etc., just sort of sitting on your desk when you wander out of the room. You lock your screen when you leave because you don't want people to see what's on your screen. So it's kind of all of that physical piece of it as well, making sure it's locked up. Versus data privacy. Thank you. You read my mind. Good, right? Which is really the responsible governance of data, right? We are responsible for all of this data. We've collected it and we're storing it. And so we're not just responsible for kind of where we store it and how we store it, but we're also responsible for who has access to it and making sure that the people who have access to it. Oh no.
Sorry, bringing this just in case.
Okay.
Let's try that.
Oh, am I too far away?
A little
I
bit,
can
but
stand over here.
Is the handheld okay for you?
Yeah, I sort of feel like I'm like in Vegas now, but okay. Like, I'm gonna shoot for you guys. Is it on?
I think it should be on.
Okay.
Try to hold it up a little bit. Thank you.
Sing right into the mic. So anyway, so back to data privacy is really important, like our governance of it. We're very aware of that. And we'll kind of talk about some of the ways that we ensure that we do have proper, custodial governance of data. So some of the ABCs of data privacy. We're going to go into data privacy. We'll talk a little bit about data security afterwards.
I'm so sorry.
No,
We're
no.
gonna need to stick to this podium.
Okay, that's fine. I can do it. I can do it.
Sorry about that.
I'm just going to anchor myself right here. I'll hang on so that I don't move around. So we're going to talk a lot about data privacy, but really data security, which is what we just talked about in terms of sort of the tactical piece of that. You have to have data security to have data privacy. So that's going to play a role in some of what we talk about. With FERPA, so I'm kind of starting, FERPA is like the granddaddy of, all of the policies. FERPA, we're going to go back into the 1970s now. So, pretend we all have our bell bottoms on, and Watergate has just happened. So this is kind of where FERPA started. Back in 1974, people really did not have a lot of faith in the government. And what they found was particularly Senator Buckley came forward with an act that he sponsored. And the act basically said, in the face of Watergate, we really need to make sure that there's transparency amongst our government institutions with the public. So specifically with educational records. And we need to make sure a couple of things. Number one, that the government's protecting our data. And number two, that people who should have access to that data have access to that data. So, so this was enacted in 1974. This granted parents and kids over 18. So once they turn 18, they really become the custodians of their own data. And then there's some exceptions to that in college, but I'll let the folks here who have college-age kids figure that one out. That was a challenge. So they would have access, they be granted access to the information in the student's educational record. I forgot to kind of define an educational record, which is basically anything that pertains information about the student and that the educational institution is in charge of. And then it also protects that data from disclosure to third parties without parental consent. So essentially not just freely giving data out to anybody that asks for it. And this was part of the reason why this law was enacted, was because back in the day, pretty much anybody with a badge could walk in, ask for data, get data, go through files, whatever. So they enacted this in 1974. And then next slide. And then they said, wow, in 1978, they said, so we've protected the data that the school districts already have, but what do we do about collecting the data, right? We have to actually make sure that when the data is collected, that there are some rules and regulations around that. So that's where sometimes this is referred to as the Hatch Act or Hatch Amendment. And Senator Hatch came forward, sponsored in 1978 PPRA, and this really governs kind of how that data is collected. So student survey data, how it's collected, how it's used. It applies to state education agencies and LEAs, local education agencies. And the next slide. And then what this really kind of boils down to is that schools have to gain parental consent when a required survey, analysis, or examination is A, so it has to meet these requirements, is A, funded in whole or in part by the U.S. Department of Education, and is being conducted to find out any of the following. There are 8 different areas, and this is going to get complicated, so I've included a chart afterwards that kind of says if this, then that. But I'm not going to read through all of those. Yep, there's the chart. So if we go back, the 8 protected areas are things that you would normally, I think, think to protect: political affiliations, religious affiliations. If somebody has mental or psychological problems, I would throw physical problems in there, sexual behaviors, attitudes, illegal, antisocial, self-inquiry. So I'm not going to read all of them, but they're, oh, I thought he was coming out to yell at me, guy. So there are these 8 areas. Now, what happens, so next slide. you can kind of see on this chart. So if student participation, this all rides to on whether or not student participation is required. So if student is participation, for example, is required, and it covers any of the 8 protected categories, then you have to provide notice and parents must opt in for the student, I have my glasses on, to take the survey. So I won't go through all of these, and I'll send this presentation out to you guys afterwards so that you have a copy of it and you can refer back to it. But yeah, as you can see, it does kind of get confusing. It gets a little complicated. So that's something that, we have to track on the back end. Most of the time, it's that the parents have to opt out. It's very rare that the parents actually have to opt in. Next slide. And if you guys have questions about any of this, stop me as we're going through it, just because I find if we try to save questions to the end, people kind of forget what they were wanting to ask. Yep.
What makes a survey required versus not required?
For opt-in or opt-out.
What would determine, like, when you guys have a survey, whether it's required?
It has to be, so if we back up, it has to be, well, the district or whomever is administering the survey determines whether or not it's
Okay.
required. So I would say the district admins will determine whether or not the students are required to participate. So generally, and I'm going to turn that over to Monique, but generally what I think sort of most school districts, the guidelines are, you're required to participate in things like, vision tests. There's different just sort of basic state mandated things that you are required to participate in. Those things you can see down at the bottom there don't fall under, the typical opt-in, opt-out. But in terms of how our school district in particular determines what's required, I would leave that to Monique. She can talk about that after. But then moving on, whether or not you have to have parental opt-in, opt-out, then it's based on that chart.
Can I ask you a quick question too? Under FERPA, does the third party refer to anybody outside of our district?
Yes.
So not anybody who works inside, we're talking about people outside. the
Yes.
district. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on from PPRA. So then we sort of fast forward to 2000. So if you think about everything that happened between 1978 and 2000, so we'll go from punch cards and dot matrix printers, and now we've moved into, smaller computers and handheld computers, and now kids have smartphones, and, so this is the age that we're moving into, and a lot of data is being collected. Now Google exists, right? Gmail exists, and a lot of data is being collected at this point, mid 90s on, about kids, right? Kids are signing up for different accounts. They're playing video games online. They're watching videos, whatever. They're listening to streaming content. And all of these vendors are sort of gathering all of this data. And particularly, there was a court case out in California with what Google was gathering, kind of going through, this was back in the day, going through people's emails and kind of pulling out keywords. So if you mentioned Doritos, they were sort of focusing on that and selling it off to advertisers to target those users. So fast forward to 2000, and people are saying, well, I really think that that's sort of protected information. I really don't want these vendors digging through my kids' emails and, whatever, online accounts and gathering all of this, what I would consider personal PII, personal identifiable information. So along comes SIPA, and this is Children's Internet Protection Act. And SIPA basically places certain requirements on us as educational agencies. And primarily, it's targeted to organizations that are federally funded, right? So we receive some kind of federal funding for our educational programs. And it's pretty much just to block student access to inappropriate material online. So what this says basically is we need to have the appropriate filters firewalls, authentication, all of that kind of stuff in place to really make sure that kids can't get into any place where they're not supposed to, inappropriate material. And so this just the policies and procedures that the reg really says you have to have policies and procedures that address the following. So the safety and security of minors. And that includes, the forms that they have. So when they go online, if they fill out forms, we have to make sure that if they're signing up for something that we have gone through and taken a look at, vetted the vendor's procedures and made sure that, if they're under 13, there's certain protections, et cetera. And then prevent the unauthorized disclosure, use, and dissemination of PII. So make sure that they're not selling that on the back end to marketers or using it themselves for marketing. So then, same year, people started to say, well, that's great for educational organizations, but what about the vendors themselves? The vendors, there's no reg out there that says the vendors can't do this. We're saying that the educational organizations are responsible for making sure that this doesn't happen, but really it's also on the vendors. So COPA, in my mind, sort of more targets the vendors, saying as a vendor, if you have some kind of application, program, solution that you are marketing out to kids, there are a set of requirements that you have to follow. The primary one being that you cannot collect information from children who are under 13 without prior parental consent. And we are very strict about that in Scarborough. We do go through, I read through every single term of service, privacy policy, everything to make sure that if this site, application, solution is requesting that we either follow the rules or we don't use it.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Does that mean that they can collect whatever they want for our students 14 and over?
No. That for them, FERPA kicks in and, all
Okay.
these other layered regulations kick in. Some of the info, so there's directory information, right? So FERPA, in the FERPA regulation, if we deem it directory information, so that's just like things that you would be able to find in a yearbook, right?
Yep.
A name, class, whatever. That kind of stuff we can use to sign kids up for things. Again, this isn't under 13, but if you had to have a roster for a particular class or whatever, but anything that's considered PII falls under FERPA. So yeah, we can't just release that. So the vendors are required to obtain parental consent when collecting or using any PII from anyone under 13. And they also, part of that reg is that they post very clearly and very publicly post what their collection practices and usage is of the data in their privacy policy online. So that's what we go through on the back end. So that's kind of, I'm just going to wrap up again. It was a very high level overview of kind of the ABCs. There's more regulations and there's more laws and there's more acts and amendments out there, but those are kind of the big overriding four that we sort of live by. Right now, when we look at student data privacy landscape, and I would say the privacy landscape, not just for students, but any privacy landscape. The evolving cybersecurity threats are probably the #1 challenge that we have, because from phishing emails to malware that you can load to your machine, that, adware that collects data about you and kind of watches you, spyware, all of that kind of stuff, that is constantly evolving. As fast as, we can code, something to try to detect and mitigate that challenge, the hackers are coding new stuff for zero day attacks. So that's always a problem, and it's always a threat for us. And it's not just a threat, in the school district, it's a threat everywhere. The pandemic posed a problem, right? Because all of a sudden we took a whole bunch of things that we normally did in the classroom, day to day, in person, and we were forced to very rapidly move them online. So during the pandemic, you saw kind of this, panicked rush to get on to the web and get cloud-based services. And that opened up some doors, that kind of some of not for us, but I would say just generally globally, that kind of left some of these general rules and regs kind of in the dust. General apathy. I mean, how many times have you guys received in the past like 5 years a notification in the mail saying, I'm sorry, your social security number was, or your credit card number, or, whatever record you had was, and so I think people are just sort of getting apathetic. It's sort of white noise in the background. And it's something that, privacy and security really is kind of becoming another one of those check boxes. People just don't really think about it that much. And I find that with my fellow tech directors, I hope none of them are watching this, but I was reading an article recently where they went out and surveyed tech directors in the US, and like 74% of them said, I'm not that worried about student data privacy. I think we're good. Without sort of backing it up with, and here's all the things that we do. Here's our policies, our procedures. Here's technically what we've put in place to protect our systems. And then a lack of training and awareness. We struggle with that all the time too. We just don't have the personnel to go out and, train every single student and every single staff person, and every person in the town who works for the town about security and privacy and, being aware of phishing scams and, potential malware infections and all that kind of stuff. So these are the challenges that we sort of face every day. And so some of the things that are happening enacted in October of 2021, the K-12 Cybersecurity Act, and this was interesting. So what this did was it authorized, but really it sort of instructed the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, CISA, which is responsible for a lot of other things. I need to get closer to the mic. I start to drift away. They're responsible for a lot of other things, not just in the educational arena, but it authorized CISA to do a study of cybersecurity risks, and specifically facing elementary and secondary schools. And then what they're supposed to do, I think they have like 120 days to do this study. And then they have like another 60 days to actually develop recommendations. And then, so next slide. So ultimately, what's supposed to come out of this after 180 days, and so this 180 days from last October, is sort of a toolkit. There's going to be like a set of guidelines and a toolkit that will be posted on the Department of Homeland Security website. And this toolkit is going to sort of, give you ideas, tips, and tactics of how to, I'm assuming, I haven't seen it, but harden your perimeter, ways that you can maybe use multi-factor authentication, some other ways that you can try to keep your data safe. And then also, I would say the easiest, most inexpensive thing is actually read the privacy policies. I can't tell you how many people don't read those, right? I mean, I'm sure every person in this room, myself included, is guilty of that at some point. You're trying to download a new app and there's like 85 pages you're scrolling through on your smartphone, right? And you're just like, ugh, I agree. Do you know what you've agreed to? Because when I read through these things, it's pretty shocking, some of the stuff that they try to get away with. So we read through it with a fine-tooth comb. I highlight things. I send it to Monique and she's like, oh my God, no more stuff from Jen. And then sometimes if we think we need to, we forward it on to, our attorneys and we get a legal opinion. And then if we can go to the next slide. Yeah. So, and then we also utilize the Maine Student Privacy Alliance. So just background about me. I was here for 7-8 years. I left and went to the banking industry for 3, and then I just recently came back about a year ago. So when I was here before, I started to get really concerned about these privacy policies, because as I was starting to read through terms of service, and sometimes what happens is you have to read the privacy policy and the term of service because they will override each other. So, and I think that's probably intentional, right? So you have to make sure you're reading both of them in conjunction with each other because they do go hand in hand. So I started to get really concerned about it, and I started to push back on some of these vendors. And then I started to reach out to I sit on the board of the Maine Educational Tech Directors Association. I started to reach out to some of my fellow META members saying, are you guys reading these? Like, are you concerned about this? Because if you were ever slapped with a lawsuit, this is a problem because they basically have total indemnification for themselves and everything's on us. So we started to talk to the National Student Data Privacy Consortium, and which actually was started by somebody down in Massachusetts. And in 2018, a bunch of us got together and said, we need to have this consortium in Maine. And the Maine DOE agreed to pay for the membership of all of the school districts in the state. So then it was one of those things like, whoever wants to lead this, like step forward, and everybody else step back. And somehow I ended up having to lead this. So we put together some training. We got a website up and running. So the MESPA, which is the Maine the Maine Student Privacy Alliance, there's a site out there, and you can see how many school districts. Can you go to the next? Yeah. So there are 70 participating school districts in Maine right now. And the purpose of this is really, one, create transparency. So we have an Exhibit E, which is kind of like that standardized privacy policy. The real push for us from MESPA and from the National Privacy Consortium was really, instead of having the vendors dictate to us constantly what this was going to look like and who was going to be liable, we wanted to push back on them from a numbers game, right? Get as many power in numbers, get as many school districts as you can in as many states to push back on these vendors and say, no, you guys are responsible for this, and you better not screw up. And here's what we want you to sign. So we had a generalized template, which is our Exhibit E, that we now send out. If a vendor wants to do business with us, we send this out. We say, your privacy policy doesn't matter to us. Here's our privacy policy. This is what we want you to sign. And it was done in conjunction with an attorney, with a law firm. Oh, back. Wasn't done. No, yeah. So, and it also streamlined requests, because there's a way on the website for teachers and staff people to actually submit a request for, they can look up, see if the piece of software that they want has signed the Exhibit E, and that can be statewide, not just in our district. And then they can submit a request. We have a separate request process that is more stringent than the one online, but it created something for the smaller school districts that really didn't have a process and didn't have the means to create one. And power in numbers, and then we have the standard data privacy agreement. So you can see that there are 86 vendors in the US across 34 states that are signing these standardized agreements and agreeing to this. And there's 10,800 districts that are participating in the nationally in these consortiums. Okay, so our tech request process. Like I said, our process is a little more stringent. We do have a request form that is online. So if you're a staff person and you go to a conference and you're like, ooh, I saw this super cool, shiny thing that I just have to have for my class, instead of kind of coming back and downloading it, which is kind of what used to happen, we said, no, you don't have those kinds of rights on your machine or anybody's machines. You have to submit this request form. It's several pages long. It does go through, requiring them to really think about, why do you need this? What are you going to use this for? Who's going to be using it? And then they submit it. Once we get it, it goes into a database. And I go through it for terms of service and privacy. We have another set of eyeballs on it for privacy as well. And then we negotiate contracts if needed, whatever. We do a significant amount of testing on the back end prior to releasing it in the wild. So there's a very long process that I know frustrates some people, but we really want to make sure that they're doing what they say they do. If they say they don't collect information from kids under 13, then we're going to load it and we're going to test it and we're going to make sure that they don't, because some of them do. And then the MESPA Exhibit E is just mention that again. Oh, that was it. So questions about any of that? No, it's so super exciting.
Well, I'm going to say not even joking. That was really interesting for me to hear about. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Is there anybody else who has questions or comments?
No, but I did find it extremely helpful.
Yeah,
Same.
yeah,
And we'll send the slide.
Yeah, that would
Thank
be
you.
great. I saw some at the bottom had some links, so that would be perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, it is a complex picture because now what we're finding is software companies are working with other software companies. And so when you read their privacy agreements and their terms of service, they contradict each other. So sometimes when we are negotiating, we are working with one company who's providing the learner management portion of the software. And then we're also working with another company who's providing the content for that software. And in some cases, some of those smaller software companies are being purchased by larger companies and use multiple learner management pieces of software. So it becomes quite complex quite quickly. And just teasing all of that out for us, it takes time. And it also takes time to get these vendors to sign these agreements as well. And we, in some cases, hold up the quote until we get those signed agreements. Drummond Woodson was the law firm that helped negotiate those agreements, which helped to ensure our students' data's privacy stays private and stays secure.
And just to jump in there too, we had almost 40 tech requests last year come through. So we do have a significant number. It's not, 5 or 6. And as Monique mentioned, but you do have to pay attention because sometimes they'll say that the data storage is going to be someplace else.
Yeah.
Amazon Web Services right now is sort of like the cheap way to store all of your data and make sure that you have disaster recovery and redundancy. So I do have to go through that because, I want to know, is it multi-tenancy? So are there multiple people on the same server? Is it single tenancy? Those are the kinds of things that we look at and question them about.
Our staff will sometimes get very frustrated with us because it takes time. And we're training our instructional tech coaches also to start asking staff these questions as well, in order to learn more about the software. I look at it from the educational perspective as well as the securities perspective. Does this piece of software does it really do something more or different for our students? And is there anything else close? But some of the software gathers information. It gathers our student information every time they interact with it. That is information that is gathered, whether it's a choice on a question or whether it's an input or whether it's a selection or a drawing or whatever the software does for us, whether it's videos, storage of those. Where does our student information go? Where is it stored? How is it stored? What happens when we terminate our agreement? That's another whole part of the conversation as well. And this includes apps, extensions, as well as downloads, the whole 9 yards.
Cloud-based services.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a moving picture. I often grieve, gone are the days when we sit around and choose a textbook and I stamp it and do it.
Yeah.
But I am excited about the potential for our students.
May I just ask one quick question? So if a staff member finds an app or a program that they want to use and you've checked with the Alliance and that this company has already completed an Exhibit E, does that mean that the staff member does not have to go through as robust of a process here? Or do you still go through that same exact process even if they've already, you still go through it?
Anyway, now we know they'll sign the Exhibit E, but I still have to go through the terms of service and licensing agreement, indemnification, cybersecurity, all of that stuff. So my take on it is kind of like, what's one, I might as well go through the privacy policy.
Yeah.
So I do that and then we kind of cross-reference it.
Yeah, the other thing that happens with these software companies is they will change their terms of service and they will change their privacy policies over time. And so keeping that going and making sure that the Exhibit E and the agreement we have with them also covers any changes is really important. Because
How many people do both of you have that work with you that are qualified to review privacy policies and terms of service?
I think you're looking at them.
The two of you. Do you know?
Yeah, and I feel for smaller districts who don't have a Jen with Jen's background, quite frankly, and are just purchasing software, are just diving in, are just allowing students to download pieces. It really is rather frightening statewide, and that's why I think we both have worked hard. I've worked hard with my curriculum leadership to understand the issue, but also to work with the tech directors to say, hey, how can we work together to improve student data privacy across the state? And it is starting, the numbers are working. It is starting to move forward and move our vendors to being much more responsive. It used to take months to get any of these agreements back because we literally sent these agreements to the vendors. It used to take months. Now it can be about a week or so, and they all have departments specially set up in order to do this kind of work. So it's changing. I'm looking forward to a national database and a national, as opposed to 34 states and one national agreement, student data privacy agreement. Someday I hope we'll get there.
That's the goal. I think once GDRP was passed in Europe, I think that's what really pushed a lot of the vendors here to start taking it seriously. Because there are huge fines in Europe if you do not adhere to GDRP requirements, and they have 10 really strict requirements that you have to adhere to. And a lot of these companies do business in various European countries. So I think that's when they started to develop like these specialized, departments within their companies that just do nothing but data privacy.
So switching gears, that's the whole ballpark. Switching gears, focusing on surveys. In terms of surveys, I'm going to talk about student surveys. Also, this notion about opt-in and opt-out, as Jen mentioned, and then some key related SPS policies, which are in alignment with this ever-changing statute over time. The two main surveys that we do, and I'll talk about some of the other pieces, is the Panorama student surveys. We focus on the SEL, but know that Panorama surveys, we've used those for a number of different surveys as well. They have a family school relations piece, but we use that platform for our spring distance learning survey back when we were under emergency learning to get some feedback from our students. We also used it a fall back to school survey in 2020 as well to get some feedback from parents, community, as well as students. And in spring of 2021, we did a rather large SEL survey. And then this past winter, we did a student survey as well. The other survey that is large and does fall under the PPR guidelines is what's known as the Me House or My House. The Me House survey, which is the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey. And that does fall under those categories because there are questions in which this survey asks. And so parents do require, we do require parent consent, and they have us requiring parent consent in order to take that survey. It is a huge burden. It's worth that, but sending the emails and the letters home to every parent, double checking to make sure that we get that information back. If we don't get that information back, our students don't participate in that, but it takes up quite a bit of time, mostly our guidance counselors, to gather that information to make sure that we then send to the DOE that information, so we have surveys for students to take that. The other piece of the other surveys that happen across the school district, we just sent one out around for community, our community dialogue, get some information on our strategic planning. The other surveys are internal. Those two are external. The information goes elsewhere. But Google Forms has opened up this whole new world of gathering information. We also have apps like Kahoot, Socrates, that we make sure we're very careful about the data that goes out there. But so, for example, the high school this past year surveyed their students on their advisory program and asked them for some feedback on their advisory program. And they used that feedback in order to help make improvements in their programming. A classroom teacher might do a check-in poll and ask certain questions and do a use a Google Form to do a quick survey on those pieces. But we don't do any other large-scale surveys other than those two. And so for Panorama, it's a local decision to use this tool. We're using it to track our progress because that is a district goal of ours. That link, the SEL Users Guide, is a user's guide, and that has all the information you want to know about the SEL questions. It has all the topics. They generally fall within 3 categories: skills and competencies, supports and environment, and well-being. Spring of 2021, we chose questions across all three of those topic areas or big buckets. This past winter, we only chose skills and competencies and well-being and a subset of those. Panorama also provides, it's a reporting environment as well. And so it also includes what's called Playbook, which provides us or our teachers and our staff with some interventions, some learning activities to use with the students to help promote SEL. We are learning with every single survey. We started out, it was completely anonymous. We did not what's called roster students. In other words, a student didn't get a survey specific to them. We move forward carefully with that. What we heard from our teachers was we want more information. We want to know who those students are so we can help them. So this past year, we worked on doing a confidential survey, which was, and this was recommended to us by the Panorama folks, instead of rostering all teachers to all students, to limit that and do principal and guidance counselor only. And so that's what we did this last spring, and we learned about that. One of the things that happened was we noticed some information our students were giving us that was concerning. And so particularly at the middle school, and this is where this issue surfaced, we did share some information from those surveys with the teachers who had that need to know. Again, FERPA, following FERPA, internally, if there is information that additional staff need to know in order to help students, that falls under FERPA, it's protected by FERPA, and that's why we shared that. We fully recognize that in the parent communication, when it says confidential, people see that as very black and white and confidential. I described, it's not unsimilar to when a student is writing and puts a piece of writing together to for a classroom teacher, and the teacher reads something concerning. If there's something concerning, that teacher is obligated to share with the people who need to know in order to help that student. That said, we recognize that we do need to stop and think about it and get some feedback on this. Our principals are going to be working together on August 5th. We're going to be taking a deeper dive into all the Panorama data over time. And so we're going to be deciding moving forward, are we going to continue to be confidential in the way that it was, or are we going to be rostering our students, or are we going to go back to an anonymous survey? So we really do need to look at how do we want to track our progress with SEL, because we have made significant progress, and it is a valuable survey to us. It does not fit under those categories for PPR. And so we, and the Panorama folks said you're going to get a better return rate on these surveys if you provide notice and provide parents the opportunity to opt out. That said, we can certainly share more information in terms of specifically what sorts of questions are going to be asked on the survey, those sorts of things. On the other hand, the Me House survey does ask, it does monitor health behaviors, attitudes, tobacco, alcohol, substance use, mental health, nutrition, physical activities, protective factors, talks about how frequently kids use helmets when they ride their bikes or buckle their seatbelts. It provides fact sheets for grades 5 and 6 is one category, then middle school and high school. Our grade 5 students have never taken that. There is an online version now. Middle school traditionally has taken it. It's every 2 years. So the burden of getting that consent piece is every other year. About 80% of the schools across the state do participate in this survey because it does provide valuable feedback. There are publicly available results. The link is included in the set of slides. And we can get local information, but we don't get any individually identifiable information on students at all. And so within the parent communications, the DOE provides us with those communications. We send that home. We have that parent opt in order for their child to participate because it falls under those categories that Jen described.
When was the last time that we did that survey?
We did that just this past fall. Typically, it is in the spring and it's in odd years, but because of COVID, They decided to move it. It was just this past fall. Results are available. I have to contact the DOE in order to download the Scarborough results. They're usually available sometime in July.
In what grades took that?
In the fall, grade 6, 7th and 8th, and high school, I believe. Yeah. But there would have been a parent communication that would have come home on that. Unless, I mean, because of the COVID thing in the fall, they were still, my understanding is they did take it, and actually, we were selected for the online portion of that survey. And so we do have policies beyond the statute. The ILD is student surveys and marketing information. And interestingly enough, this one has been around quite a bit. We generally do not allow marketers or surveys or allow those within our schools. I don't know of any of them, but we do have a policy to help articulate and remind folks around the parental consent to surveys and how it must be in alignment with the PPR Act. And there is a difference whether it's funded under U.S. Department of Education, which my house is in part, and then if it's not funded, the notice to opt out. We don't participate in any of those, even though some districts I know do, because it generates some funds. But we usually say, trying to preserve instructional time, we say no. And the other is the local policy, which basically says it's quite similar to the policy commitment to the learning results, which basically says we're going to follow the state law around the learning results. And this is really student education records and information. And it basically says that the Scarborough School Department will comply with FERPA. And then it also articulates in detail the directory information that can be shared, and also provides a little bit of information about the questions that you've probably seen on those annual forms that come home in terms of permissions for photos and information being released and those sorts of things, in which we are moving towards electronic as opposed to all of those paper pieces. So again, another reason why our online environment needs to be secure and remain private. Questions?
I just was curious, when I'm looking at the ILD, for example, and you mentioned, Jen mentioned it earlier. So when we're talking about survey providers where the funding comes from the US Department of Education, where does our survey tools, how do they fall under that? Are all of our survey tools covered by Department of Education funding? How does that work?
No, for example, the Me House survey, they contract with a provider, a survey, an online survey, or a paper survey publisher. So they contract with that group who has expertise in doing those surveys. They've worked with them to develop that survey. That the DOE helps to fund that process. We don't pay for that. We don't have to pay for that, but we are asked to implement that survey within those guidelines.
And that would be because the DOE helped to fund it on the Me House side. So therefore, we would then be required to follow those particular rules as it pertained to those that are funded by the US DOE. Is that correct?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
How do we pay for the Panorama? Is that just out of our general fund?
We use grant funds. We've used grant funds in the past, Title IV funds to fund that as well. We talked about ESSER funds at some point. And then most recently, for the 6 month will be ESSER. We have used local funds to fund that as well.
But using like federal programs like ESSER, that doesn't count as US DOE.
No,
funded?
because that's not, because we are making the local decision to contract with that vendor.
Okay, so it's not really about the funding, it's about who initiates.
It's about who
survey.
initiates, but it's also about those categories.
Yep.
And there is, in the Panorama data, in those survey questions, it does not meet the criteria for any one of those 8 categories. That said, we're still concerned about the student data privacy and security.
We did start using Panorama just before we got into.
was before.
COVID land, and so
Yeah.
that definitely informed the questions about where the funding could come from.
Yeah.
I have to imagine that I apologize for all my questions. This is new territory and I find this incredibly fascinating. So the 8 criteria that is under the PPRA that we
Mhm.
just discussed. So we're saying that questions that relate to any of these, any questions that are asked in the survey would
In
then,
any survey. yeah,
any survey we get would open us up to this
Online or paper.
online or paper would open us up to these requirements.
Yes.
Okay, so I have I think I must have misunderstood something. So when Kristen asked the question about Panorama and you said it doesn't fall under, I think I
The
think I missed
questions
something.
that are being asked in Panorama don't fall under that amendment because they don't ask, there aren't any questions that fall within any of those 8 categories.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Whereas the Me House, I used to call it My House, the Me House survey, there are questions that fit under those categories.
Didn't one of our Panorama surveys include data about household income? And I thought it did. I thought the one that we did, oh, I guess maybe I'm thinking, didn't we use Panorama to do the DEI survey?
No, that was Survey Monkey.
Oh, okay.
It may fall in. I can't comment on that without seeing the actual questions. And it really is in terms of whether or not you're asking the students or the parents. That's another difference. If it's a question, if it's a survey question for a parent, I'm not sure it would fall under that. If this is really about protecting students.
So the reality is it doesn't matter what tool, what vehicle you're using. What matters is the questions you're asking.
Correct.
And then whether or not the students are required to take the survey or not
Right.
required to take the survey and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think the chart will make it.
When it's a survey that they're not required to take, is it presented to the students in that way, that it's not something they have to do?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think we need to do a better job of that because very often our students want to please their teachers. And so we want to be sensitive to that. So I think we could do a better job of that if, and allow students to be more aware of that option.
That would be great.
If it's decided that like the Panorama survey will be like a roster and it'll be available to like teachers and everyone, will students be notified that it's like on a roster and their
Yes.
results? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, because we know that influences students' decisions and how they respond. There are advantages and disadvantages both ways. It's a challenge. It's a difficult decision. We're going to wrestle with that on August 5th.
I have another question that I don't know who would be best suited to answer it, but the policy states that a copy of the policy is sent to families every year. Are we doing that?
And within a reasonable time, a substantial change is made to the board. I'm not sure how the policy is distributed each year. I know nothing comes from my office, in the distribution of that policy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't ever recall seeing it sent as a parent, but that certainly does not mean that it has not happened.
And there may
That's-
be other policies that have that language in there. I think generally school departments, having the policies available on the website may be considered distribution. I'm not sure.
Okay. I personally think it would be really helpful if this were in some way sent out to families.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, this policy really is around sort of marketing pieces, and we've taken a pretty straightforward stand of no. So we've had to fall on this policy. I really haven't, I've known it existed, but we've never had to depend on it at all or reference it or use it because generally the answer is no.
I think my last question is, I know that you said that training is an issue, and I guess I'm wondering there are a lot of people that would need to be trained in this. So is the full staff trained on what kinds of questions can go in surveys that they might administer as a classroom teacher? Do we have work to
Not
do?
specific to surveys, because then, survey, poll, those sorts of things. I do know as we've been going into this SEL initiative over the past couple of years, teachers have had questions because they want to be very careful
Yeah.
about their professional boundaries with students. And I have had teachers ask or share that they're uncomfortable asking certain questions. And some have even referred to the code of conduct policies. And I said, asking, and I think one of the examples was asking a student to reveal a secret. And I said, asking a student how they're doing today is very different than asking a student to reveal a secret. There's a little bit of area in there. So our teachers are aware and they're asking those questions. So I feel pretty good about that. But it would be wonderful to have some more time to have conversations with teachers around this issue. We've done a lot of educating, particularly through our instructional coaches around software. Our staff can get very frustrated with us around software selection, and they will share that they've piloted something. Well, what information went in there? And we have subscription guidelines, which sort of we encourage teachers not to have students use their name, but pick an avatar, those sorts of things, just to reduce some of the risk. And I always ask them, well, where did the information go? I don't know. It's like, well, we need to know where the information goes. So it's a continual, and sometimes it's just one-on-one when people come up and ask for something or have a question. It's it's a teachable moment for staff.
And just a clarification / add on to that too. What I was referring to in terms of training was really training for cybersecurity.
Yep.
But that's a huge piece of this because they really need to understand where the data is going, where it's stored, who has access to it, what kind of access controls are there, that kind of thing. So I think in terms of that, very first couple of slides that I had was really how that fits together and goes hand in hand. And that's something that we struggle with a lot, of trying to get the word out about that and the dangers that exist.
Yeah, and I use concrete examples. Would you leave your student papers, all your student papers, in the teacher's room on a table? Well, no. I said, well, you need to log out of this software application because it's not a table in the teacher's room. It is the entire globe that you've just placed this student information at risk.
I always say, would you print it in the leader? If you're not going to print it in the leader, then it shouldn't go any further than your desk.
Are there any other questions or comments for either Jen or Monique? Well, thank you guys so much. This was incredibly informative, I think. Lots of really good information. So thank you so much for doing this. All right. I would love to just take maybe a 2-minute. Did you have something? Okay, we'd just take a 2-minute break really quick before we start into the next meeting. All right, thank you.
That time management.
Yeah. All right, good evening and welcome to the Thursday, July 21st, 2022 Scarborough Board of Education School Board meeting. May I have the attendance, please?
Sure. Mrs. Giftis,
She's been excused.
Mr. Kelleher,
He's been excused.
Miss Leong,
Here.
Mrs. Lindstrom,
Here.
Mr. Peony Huff,
Here.
Mrs. Turner,
Here.
Miss Bertulia,
Here.
and Mr. Shumway.
Here.
Perfect. Can everybody please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Agenda item 4.0 are adjustments to the agenda. Are there any adjustments this evening?
No adjustments this evening.
All right. Agenda item 5.0 is public comment on agenda items. Is there anybody here wishing to make public comment? All right, seeing none, I will close it for the evening. Agenda item 6.0 is the superintendent's report. 6.1 is staff recognition.
All right, well, we've got three parts to tonight's superintendent's report. The first is I'm really excited to present some staff recognition for one of our Wentworth educators. And then Monique's going to join us and talk about our goals and our ESSA presentation. And then thirdly, Sue Ketch is here, and she's going to share with us our NEASC accreditation progress report for our high school. But to kick it off, our Wentworth educator, Catherine Newell, won a state, Newell, Hewitt. I'm looking at it. At least I got the right district. Catherine Hewitt, our Wentworth teacher, took a statewide award, Maine Eco Excellence Award. And actually, Kelly Crosby, our principal, has shared with me a write-up about a little bit about Ms. Hewitt. And then we actually have a short video to watch about the award. I will say the garden and greenhouse in front of Wentworth, every time I go to the building to visit, I mean, it's such a powerful learning tool. I mean, almost every time, regardless of when I'm over there, there's a class in there, and it's not like a science class, necessarily a science lesson. I mean, I was there for a math teacher doing area and perimeter and using the beds. I mean, it's such a powerful learning tool on so many different levels, but every time I'm over there, it's being used. Ms. Hugh has been a long time garden champion at Wentworth School. She's a full-time classroom teacher, makes time to truly be the leader at our school and all things garden. The old Wentworth School had a small garden with some raised beds and a small greenhouse. When we moved over to the new Wentworth in 2014, the space designated for the garden was a blank canvas. Ms. Hewitt has designed the entire area you see today. Not only has her background as a landscaper been an enormous benefit to our school, but her passion for this work is second to none. She's secured multiple grants, multiple donations over the course of multiple years. She oversees the garden assistant that we now have in place, who facilitates so many activities. Coordinates with Garbage to Garden for our compost, organizes summer garden volunteer weeders and waterers and harvesters, and most recently spearheaded efforts to have a new greenhouse installed that will enable an entire class to work inside, and then also create a year-long growing season. What she's created is really special, and created an opportunity to show our nearly 700 Wentworth kids how to be good stewards of the earth, where food comes from, how to reap what you sow, how to be curious, and how to give back to your community. So she is super worthy of this honor and this award, and would love for us to check out the video.
With member prices, Expedia members can make waves.
Skip ad.
My name is Catherine Hewitt, and I teach 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade at Wentworth School in Scarborough. We call this Wentworth Garden and really treat it like an outdoor classroom. In 2015, we started with a blank slate. It's, step by step by step, little piece at a time. It's a really great way to get kids engaged with something real. It's tangible, they can touch it, they can experience it, they can relate it to the rest of their life. It's sort of a lifelong endeavor. In this present day, kids have really lost contact with nature and being outside and away from screens. So it's extra important to me that they are able to be out there and observe and witness and be curious. There's a lot of that that's been lost. So that's my big goal, is to get them curious and want to, find out more and just keep watching and making up ideas about what's going on out there.
All right, well, congratulations again to Catherine Hewitt. The second part of my update, I'm going to turn it over to Monique to review goals, strategic goals, and our asset presentation.
Hard to follow that one up. We are running our summer academy, and this year the theme is the garden, and the academy is happening right in that garden. I met with Catherine to kind of go over, I have a tour and the do's and the don'ts, and it was really, she was incredibly accommodating and welcoming, and we had some students in there pulling up the garlic, which will be a fundraiser as the garden moves forward. And they were very excited to be able to take a piece of garlic home with them. Well, good evening. I'd like to talk a little bit tonight. This presentation is really, it's almost a twofer. It's a twofer in that this is a report that typically is done in June. And typically we have all the building principles up, and we have a whole lot of presentations and a whole lot of data around our progress towards our goals, our strategic goals. But given the pandemic and those things, we sort of condensed some pieces. But it's also a requirement as part of our federal grants as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I will give you the highlights in terms of the data around this. I could go on for days diving deep into the data. The curriculum committee has seen pieces a little bit, they've had a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the data, and we will continue to do that when we meet next. So let's dive in. We have, if you recall, 4 strategic target areas, and we have goals around those strategic target areas. These shouldn't necessarily be new: effective teaching and learning, safe and inclusive schools, global citizenship, and community engagement are the 4 big buckets around which we organize our improvement work. And so this past year, we had a strategic improvement plan. Thank you. And what we do is we have our district vision and mission, all policy, and we have focus areas. And what we are required to do is identify these as part of our data review process. We go through that process periodically, looking at the data we have and identifying, are there other focus areas that we need to add? Are some, do we need to let go of? Given the pandemic, this continuity has served us well. And so I'm going to report out on our progress around those tonight. So under strategic target area number 1, we had 2 district goals, one for mathematics, the other for literacy. In strategic target area 2, we had one around SEL. So we have those 3 district goals. And for our first district goal, we were looking at 80% proficiency. I'll talk about those. So in literacy specifically, we use Iready and NWEA in terms of tracking our students' progress. Our literacy goal, our outcome was set at 80% of our students meeting or exceeding growth targets. It's not about the proficiency level, it's about our students growing and meeting those growth targets. We fell short of that 80% mark, we at 42%. Know that those growth targets are pre-pandemic growth targets. So K-5, we have made some progress, and I'll show you some data around our progress. K-5, we've had a pretty significant literacy initiative over the last 2 or 3 years. We are implementing a phonemic awareness program for all students, and when we dive deep into the data, we've seen some significant gains for our students. We had a word study group of teachers this past year working together, focusing. We were not happy even pre-pandemic with not only our phonemic awareness, but also our phonics instruction, our phonics performance. And so they not only made recommendations for tier 1 interventions this year to leverage the Iready personalized instruction for each and every student K-5, but they also have made a recommendation moving forward for a core phonics program, which we'll be training this summer and implementing in the fall. Middle school ELA teachers weren't real happy with their current curriculum, and they wanted to start reviewing other curriculum. So we started with a very narrow, we had 11 different programs they wanted to look at. And so we spent quite a bit of time reviewing those, all to come full circle around back to what they're currently using, which is an online program and is updated annually. It's not as if we're hanging on to a 10 or 12-year-old program. ELA has also been engaged within their teams to identify core activities, resources, and begin this collaborative unit development. Actually, all departments have been doing that as well. In the high school, there have been some significant shifts in the SAT student assistance program and the response to intervention supports to provide additional supports to students. The instructional coaches worked with the department, beginning reviewing data for ELA. And so diving a little bit into the literacy data at K2, this is Iready data. And you'll notice there's a whole lot of stuff here, but my 2 important points, this is fall to spring growth. And so we have Blue Point School in that graphic above, 8 Corners School and Pleasant Hill Primary School. Focusing in on the bar graphs are median. So half our students, for example, made less than 97% and half made more than that. Towards typical growth by Iready is about a year's growth. Stretch growth is for those students who are not at grade level. It is a more rigorous target. It's challenging but attainable, which is set to put the student back towards grade level. That's the ultimate goal. So to focus on half of our students at Blue Point School across all grade levels, half of our students actually met or exceeded their typical growth for this past year, 51% at 8 Corners School and 63%. And that is really a direct result of the phonemic awareness and the phonics instruction that's been going on, because those are the foundational skills that we really work on at K2. The chart down below shows you across all schools and drives the point home that while 50% of our students met or exceeded typical growth at Blue Point, that doesn't mean no one else grew. You can see the distribution of the growth in those other bars. So all of our students have been growing, which just may not be at the rate we want all of our students to grow. For NWEA, which is in the grades 3 through 8 and grade 11, what this chart shows is the growth. NWEA, if you recall, measures in what's called RIT growth. RIT growth is a point scale. It's a scaled score across grade levels. And so this bar graph, those gray bars show our local growth. The yellow diamonds are pre-pandemic projected growth for schools similar to Scarborough. And again, those are pre-pandemic growth goals. And some grade levels this year did better than others in working towards that growth goal. We track the performance over time, both by grade level, but also in cohort groups of students as well in a number of different ways. So another view of that NWEA data, while our students may not be growing as we've set that goal for them, our students still are outperforming compared to the national average. And keep in mind that those national groups, that blue line is pre-pandemic achievement. So our students still are generally performing above the national average. We also track this data over time, both for cohorts, but also across a particular grade level over time as well. In the area of mathematics, K-5, one of the things that they've done this past year as we've come out of the pandemic, we have instructional calendars and planners for teachers. So we know exactly what sorts of core activities we expect. So at the beginning of this year, our instructional coaches got together to adjust those calendars to sort of scaffold to ensure that if, okay, the third grade teachers didn't get to a particular chapter, that the fourth grade teachers knew that, and we did some scaffolding of the curriculum to make sure we can reduce those gaps. And that pretty much happened across all phase levels for mathematics. Middle school and high school, we're in the second year of new materials implementation. Middle school, one of the next steps for us is to really take a look at 6th and 7th grade as well. And middle school has also been involved in reviewing all their standards and learning goals, as well as beginning some collaborative unit development as well. 9-12, second year of a new algebra and geometry materials, and there will be a project-based curriculum that will be new next year for Algebra 1 as well. High school across all departments did complete their internal curriculum guide, which is pretty darn amazing given over 700 courses that are offered at the high school. Pretty darn amazing. And in terms of data for the mathematics, again, Iready for K2, you'll notice that for typical growth, our students were at about 45%, 48%, and 42% across the 3 schools. And then on the bottom row there, the distribution of growth, while almost half of our students met those typical growth, the other students also did grow, just not at that same rate or meet those target growth benchmarks. In our NWEA, you can see the same graph as we had for reading. Again, the yellow is pre-pandemic, and the bars indicate our growth over the course of this year. 11th grade doesn't mean that they didn't take it. 11th grade came out even. And if you were astute enough to notice for reading, there we went back 3 RIT points. It doesn't mean our students got less smart over the course of the year. One of our challenges with grade 11 is really taking the assessment seriously. There is a whole lot of assessment that takes place at the high school, particularly in the junior year. I'm hoping that the state is going to change that up a little bit and have the NWA maybe a little bit earlier. Because those juniors, I think in the month of May, there might have been 1 or 2 days at the high school in which students were not involved in testing. Some students were not involved in testing. And kudos to Ms. Ketch for making that all work scheduling wise with all of those different groups of students. Here's our data, how we perform, the red line compared to the national average. Again, we generally perform do better than the national average. We've got a little bit of a blip around 6th and 7th grade. What we do when we see something like this is we take a look at patterns to see what patterns might be happening, and we start asking lots of questions and looking at other data sets and having conversations with teachers to see if this is an anomaly or if this is a particular group of students. That's where the cohort data can come in handy. To see what's going on, and we'll be doing that work starting this fall. This was spring data for us. So in the area of SEL, again, skills and competencies, some highlights. We've had quite a bit of an effort in the SEL area this year. At K-5, the leaders and the teachers modeled SEL check-ins, sharing lots of ideas at all meetings, really focusing on the adult SEL, helping to support the resilience of our educators. All the morning announcements included an SEL component for students. At 6-8, the entire staff engaged in a book study, improving every lesson plan with SEL. And they used some of that because they set staff and student goals in skills for self and interpersonal skills as a community member. So that's the application of what they were learning. At the high school, quite a bit was going on with SEL. We had a very active student and staff SEL committee. And so they expanded their SEL practices within the advisory program. They got feedback from students and staff and made improvements in that program moving forward. There was also sharing monthly and weekly SEL resources for teachers to use with students. They had a very popular Tuesday tutorial video series going on at the high school that staff found quite valuable. And across K-12, our K-12 SEL specialist was hired in March, spent most of the spring onboarding and has been coordinating and working with the Summer Reading Academy, but also we're putting on 2 SEL summits, one for K-5 and one for 6-12 in August for teachers. And then the March 18th staff day focused on SEL. We had Dr. Brooks come and do a presentation, and then staff engaged with the Panorama data, as well as learning lessons that they would then use with students from the playbook. In terms of the Panorama data is perception data. It's perception surveys. And typically there are 5 responses or 7 responses. And so the results come back as percent favorable. And that percent favorable is a pretty high bar, really. If you look at those examples, not at all excited, slightly excited, somewhat excited, quite excited, very excited, really percent favorable chooses the top 2 out of 5 or 3 out of the 7 for percent favorable. So when you look at results from Panorama, this is our growth. The teal is K2 and for spring 2021. The first column is for grades K2 and then the winter. And so we can see a little bit of a shift there, sometimes in positive direction, sometimes a little bit farther back. K2, the teachers take a survey for the students in those topic areas. The students don't take the survey. And what we noticed was in the survey results, the primary schools did meet. We set a goal of having at least 2 topics increase their percent favorable. And the primary schools did, Wentworth did not. In that link down below, I presented on March 8th a more detailed review of the Panorama results to the curriculum committee. And so there's a whole lot more charts, graphs, and information within that slide. And I'm happy to answer questions after you've taken a look at that as well. And then for 6-12, both the high school and middle school met the goal of that increase of at least 2 topics. And so what we're thinking for next year, and again, this is sort of as we dive deeper into this data, at this point, we want to continue with having that be a district goal, and we will keep that same outcome as a target for our schools. So on June 21st, our leadership team met and we explored the data and we had conversations around our goals, our strategic target areas, our progress, what are our successes, what's going on, what are some next steps. And so it was really around, do we stay the course for these areas? Do we continue on and get deeper? Even though we have some indicators of progress, we felt as a group that it made some sense to stick with it, maybe set some higher outcomes for ourselves, but to continue on with the work. And so drafted for next year, our district goals, if you could move that slide, thank you. We'll keep a goal in literacy, we'll keep the goal in math, and we'll keep the goal in social emotional learning. And what we'd like to do is see at least a 10% improvement in the percentages of students who meet or exceed those typical growth targets. At least a 10% improvement. And then we're keeping the same, at least a positive growth change in percent favorable in at least 2 of the 6 Panorama survey topics. But we also talked a lot, we looked at the data from the community dialogue on that day. And the global citizenship is aligned with the SEL, so it's pretty much the same piece. But we decided as a group to add an additional goal around improving our parent community engagement and community involvement, which adds a particular target for us in our work moving forward as we reset out of the pandemic. The past couple of years, we haven't had parents come in. We've leveraged Zoom. We've had some engagement in that form. But we also started having conversations amongst the leadership team of what do we mean by parent engagement? What does that mean? Is that us sharing information out? Is that information from parents? How do we really help parents come back into the schools, physically back in the schools? And how do we best utilize their talents within our schools? And so we've set this additional goal for ourselves. In terms of the grant, though, we are required to have 3 goals. 1 must be math, 1 must be literacy. And then we have our choice of a 3rd. So for grant purposes, we're not required to have that community engagement goal per se. Embedded within the titles, the funding sources, we do have parent involvement requirements anyway. So we receive funding delivered through these title programs. Title I, improving academic achievement of the disadvantaged. Title II, or 2A, is really about professional development. And Title IV is a little bit of this and that and well-rounded and all sorts of things. The projects have to align with our district goals. That's a part of the requirement. So the strategic planning, the goals work, all fits in with this process in order to receive federal funding. Besides, it's a good thing for an organization to know where it's going. We try to work strategically to make continuous improvement as part of our mantra. So I'll talk a little bit about each of the funding sources and what the funding we're looking at, the funding to go towards. And then certainly if the public or if board have questions or comments or other ideas, please feel free to reach out to me. This is a requirement to have this conversation and share these thoughts and get some feedback from the public. So Title 1A, you have to allocate funding and services for neglected or homeless students. This past year, we allocated some set aside monies to help pay for transportation for our homeless students, and we have used that right up. Also parent engagement and family engagement in order to help support our parents in helping their children. And then we also have a private school set aside. Morrison Center is our private school within our area. The FY23 allocation is $117,000 approximately. Our project, as we look at which school can qualify for Title I funding, we look at our free and reduced lunch numbers. Now, our free and reduced lunch numbers, as a result of the fact that lunch has been free over the past few years, there is less motivation to turn in that paperwork. So quite frankly, our numbers have pretty much split in half. We're generally around the 14 to 15% mark overall. We are now at the 7% mark. Now, this generally means less funding. We've been able to hang on to, this is a little bit less than last year, and there is a hold harmless rule. So and this is a statewide issue, so I'm not sure what the state is going to do around this or the federal government, quite frankly. For us, in terms of a project, that means that the funding, which was at Wentworth School for additional literacy support, is now moving to Blue Point School. I'm meeting with Kelly Mullen Martin, the principal, on Monday to talk about what sort of services we might provide. We could provide additional staff, most likely be one professional staff person for additional support in literacy or in math. We will most likely make that decision after we take a deep dive into the data. For Title II is about professional development. In this past year, we've used it to fund the salary and benefits for the K-12 SEL specialist. We're going to continue to do that in using that funding next year. We have some carryover money to help with this because she wasn't hired until March. Title IV is well-rounded education. You have to have at least 20% for that. Safe and healthy schools, effective use of technology. What we decided to do is transfer that funding. One of the things that our representative said to us is, you know, your goals are pretty similar. Why not just transfer the funding into Title IIA? Oh, okay. Sounds fine. That funding this year helped pay for Dr. Brooks to come and present. It also pays for some professional development in SEL. And will help support between ESSA and this will help support those summits in the summer for professional development and training. So those are our thoughts for our grants. The beginning of the application process, that is boatloads of fun. Oh my goodness. It's an online application where we literally have to put everyone involved in all of the meetings where we analyze the data and their role and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to be working on that pretty quickly, but we're also going to continue to analyze the data. The steering committee will be coming back together again for SEL. They'll be looking at the data as well to update their action plans. Our leadership council, August 5th, we're going to be taking a deeper dive into that and how to support staff, and then building leadership teams. So we look to build building specific goals out of these district goals so that it is more applicable to them. And then we have those action plans, and then we revisit those action plans, update those action plans, and then we will be back to see you again in the spring, if not sooner. Maybe we'll do a little bit of a mid-year update for you as well. And if you have any questions, comments, or interested in becoming involved in any or all of this, you know where to find me.
Thank you, Monique. Are there any questions for Monique before Jeff? I have two. You have one? I'm sorry, I keep just talking right over you. Sorry. Why don't you go?
I just wanted to say I really like the fourth goal that you added. I think the community engagement piece is huge, and I'm really excited to see that.
I have a question. So when we talk about students that did not meet the typical growth, right? We're not saying, I just want to be very clear, we're not saying that they are not at grade level. Is that correct?
Correct. They may be at grade level, but they haven't grown. They haven't made progress, or their progress was not enough to meet that target or that sort of typical growth target.
So when we notice these numbers, and we, again, I understand that we're talking after post-pandemic, right? So we've
got norms that don't work.
Yeah.
That are pretty challenging for us.
Right. So is this where the early intervention specialist you mentioned might help?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. What happens at the building level is as data sets become available, building principals or data teams or RTI teams analyze the data, and they look at the results of children and say, does this make sense? What other data do we have? Is this typical? Does this make sense? Are they receiving services? If they are receiving some sort of services, whether it's academic support or special ed or just additional help from the teacher, are they making progress is always the question. And if they're not making progress, then we engage in the RTI process to try and figure out what's going to work for that child.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. And then my second question is the graphs that show our performance as it relates to the national level. Did I hear you right that we're tracking higher than the national, we're tracking higher right now, test scores right now than the national average pre-pandemic?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, it will be interesting as norms change and how they choose to do the norms. both, and for NWEA, Iready gathers those over years, so that will, it won't be as drastic. I'm not sure about what NWA does, because NWA typically does their norms about every 5 years. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. It's just going to be interesting to see how things shift and how comparisons will be made moving forward.
Well, thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Monique. And to the third part of my update this evening, I'm going to turn it over to our high school principal, Sue Ketch.
Good evening. I'm here to talk a little bit about the 5-year NEASC report, but I'm going to go back a little bit before I talk about that report to make sure everyone understands all of this. So NEASC stands for New England Association of Schools and Colleges. And at the high school level, they come about once every 10 years and assess the entire building. We begin our work generally 2 years prior to that visit. There are teams that look at standards. Every professional person in the building is a member of a team. We do a self-assessment on that work. Then a team comes in, people at various levels of education in all the New England states visit our school for about 4 days and kind of look the school over high and low. They've looked at reports and then they compare what they see with what the reports say, and then you get accredited or not. And so we did our visit. We had our 10-year visit in the fall of 2017, and we were accredited, but we did get 33 recommendations that NEASC thought we should take a look at. And I should say that one of the things that NEASC does is they always have some goals and standards and things that they're looking for in every school. And you may or may not feel that's a need for your building, but they do make recommendations for us. So we received 33. And we had a 2-year, you always have a 2-year report. And so that was done in the fall of 2019, just pre-pandemic. The timing was good on that. So it was a lot of work because you have to do a report on each of the recommendations. So the building leadership team started working that summer. We looked at the different recommendations. We tried to look at members of the instructional leadership team and who might be able to write 1 or 2 reports of the 33. And then the building leadership team, we took the rest of them and worked on that. And so just to give you a little frame of reference, for the 2-year report, we said we had 8 of the 33 completed. We had 18 in progress. We had 4 planned for the future, knew we needed to work on them, but we hadn't gotten to them yet. 2 that we rejected at the time that we just didn't think was right for us at the moment, and 1 that we hadn't taken any action on. So we were asked to do some updated reports the 2 following years, years 3 and year 4. And I'm going to say that I have a sneaky suspicion that we got extra reports because we were doing them and turning them in. So they kept sending us more work to do. But we kept doing our reports and turning them in. And then this spring, long about mid-April, I got an email from a nice lady at NEASC saying, don't forget that your due date for your 5-year report is on May 1st. And I was like, what? And I said, we have received nothing giving us that as a due date. And so she looked and then got back to me and said, well, in a 9-page letter you got in 2019, embedded on page 3 at the last paragraph was a due date for the, and I was like, you didn't remotely think you should send us a little reminder? So we did ask for a 1-month extension, which they were happy to give us. They actually said they would give us more, but we sort of decided as a building leadership team, we wanted it off our plates before summer. So we said, we'll have it ready on June 1st. And so this year, because of the timing, I would say the building leadership team managed quite a bit of this report. As everyone knows, in a high school, May is a super busy month for teachers. So we tackled a lot of that, but the net results are really impressive. We moved from 8 completed at the 2-year report to 17 completed, which is about over 53% of the overall standards. In progress, we moved up to 13 from, we moved down from 13 to 18 because we got more of those completed. That was another 40%. So we really were at 94% are either in progress or completed. And I should just mention that a lot of the things that are in progress are pretty darn impossible to get to completed, because you never quite get where you can say, well, that's done, because you're like, no, it's done for now, but we really have a next step. So there was one thing planned for the future, one thing rejected, and we had none that we hadn't taken any action on. So that's really great. And so we got their letter on June 27th, and they told us that they had voted to accept our 5-year report with no lingering reports. So that was good. And that they were continuing our accreditation. And I want to just make sure I really thank the building leadership team for that work in May, and especially Nate Terrio, who offered to do a lot of the writing of the report as we would meet and come up with what needed to be said. He did a lot of work on that. So I really want to give Nate some kudos there. But also in this recent letter, the commission specified 22 items that they were pleased to learn about. And so I've picked a few to share with you. I'm not going to do all 22 for you, but many, I wanted to just say overall, I think many of the 22 commendations are focused on 3 things: the vision of the building, the curriculum work, and the supports for student success. So I think a lot of it kind of surrounds that. One of the things that they commented on was the adoption of the Maine guiding principles to serve as the school's challenging and measurable 21st century learning expectations for the students. And if you remember, in the fall of 2018, which was my first year, we decided as a staff with Superintendent Kuchenberger to kind of step away from the standards-based learning, which we had been working on and been doing for a year, and it was not working really well. And so we spent my first year as principal retooling that and going back to the more general graduation requirements. And part of that was working with the board, and the board changing policies where we decided the 21st century goals would be embedded in every unit of every class, and that we were going to take the stance that students progressing nicely in their classes and passing their courses were improving on the 21st century guiding principles. And so that is all now embedded in the coursework. And if you look at the curriculum guides, you will see where different units and topics that courses cover highlight some of those. And just to make sure everyone knows what those 21st century guiding principles are, there will be no quiz, but they are clear and effective communicators, self-directed lifelong learners, creative and practical problem solvers, responsible and informed citizens, and integrative and informed thinkers. So each department picked 2 of those to kind of focus on in their department. Like, for example, social studies grabbed being a responsible, informed citizen, because they can tie that into a lot of their coursework. But over all of the courses we teach, they're embedded throughout, but each department kind of took 2 of those 5 to kind of super focus on those. One of the things that they commented on was the reformation of our student assistance team. We call it the SAT team, to analyze performance and attendance data, to identify students needing assistance and develop appropriate supports and interventions. This team is meeting every 2 weeks. It started back up just this past year. it's made up of a lot of our members of student services, some of our lead teachers, the study center, the nurses, social workers. And what we're doing every 2 weeks is looking at kids that are on our worry list or their grades have started to fall, and we look at them and we build a plan. And I would say out of that work this year, which was a kind of a re-engaging with that process, is how we came up with the budget request to ask for another ed tech in the study center, so we can now take another step to work on RTI work. And our goal with that ed tech, which we did receive in the budget, which is awesome, is they're going to help do more of the regular work in the study center, and our 2 teachers are going to do more of the RTI, working on interventions with students and then recording whether those interventions are helping or not. So SAT this year is growing us in RTI next year. And just another quick thing, so you know that as students are being looked at to go into special ed services, which I wouldn't say we're not doing that every day at the high school, because this is a school that's very strong in special services. And a lot of our kids have been identified before they get to the high school. But when you do have one that maybe is showing signs that they haven't showed of struggle in the high school level, maybe they've transferred in from another district, so they're new to us, but we're seeing that there are challenges. You have to show that RTI work that you've tried to do interventions and they've not been working for a student to enter special ed. That's part of the pre-work that has to be done. So this is important work for us to be able to do for all of our students when they need it. One of the things, and Monique mentioned it a little while ago, and this is a huge accomplishment, and I'm super proud of the staff, was that we completed the curriculum guide. We were a couple of years behind our initial goal, but there was this pesky thing called COVID getting in the way of us getting that work done. But this spring we did complete that. So very proud of that work. As Monique said, hundreds and hundreds of classes offered at the high school, and this curriculum guide had to be written for every single course we teach. So that was a big project. It's one of those that will sort of always be in progress, because you're always looking at your current curriculum and how you might tweak it, et cetera. But great accomplishment for us to have gotten it all finished, and now we can be at the look at it and tweak it stage, which will be much easier. Student surveys conducted both formally and informally throughout the year, and we really have in recent years tried to reach out to our students and ask them, how are we doing with this? How are we doing with that? Give us some feedback so we can use that. One example that I would use from this year is in January, we started a new advisory program this year. We've been growing it for about 4 years now, but this past year, we launched a separate advisory plan for each grade level. So for example, the freshman advisory first semester was a lot about transitioning to the high school successfully. Seniors track was a lot about thinking beyond high school. And so now we've kind of worked on a separate train track for each grade level. And so we asked for some feedback from the students in January. They gave it to us, and that helped us work on what we were doing for the second semester. And we will be continuing to get that feedback from them. The integration of student data into one platform to provide a holistic view of student growth. Thank you, Monique, for the work on that. The Iready Diagnostic to determine the needs of 9th graders in both reading and math. And going back in time, we really at the high school only tested 11th graders. So we didn't have a lot of testing data to look at to improve our instruction. This Iready has been very helpful for us to learn where kids are at their first year of high school so that we can work moving forward. And you talked a little bit about making sure the kids are paying attention and trying hard on those tests to really get solid data. And we've taken the stance at the high school to do it in a testing morning where they're all put in groups and test just one morning and get it done. And we have seen the scores and their work ethic just grow tremendously by doing it that way. So we will continue with that. Prior to that, it was done like within their classes. So they might take an English one with their English teacher, and we found that varied a lot. So we're going to stick with our new plan on that. The schedule adjustment so that the advisory program was more equitable to serve all students. That was something that in the decennial visit, they really hit us with. You are not including your vocational students by doing it at 9:15 in the morning. And they were right, although we have morning vote kids and afternoon vote kids. So we tumbled with that. We struggled with it a little bit, but eventually what we decided was at students that go to PAS always go in the morning. Students that go to Westbrook, first year at Westbrook, they go in the morning. Second year, they go in the afternoon. So approximately 25% of our vote kids go in the afternoon every year. So what we did was 2 days a week for those second year students at Westbrook. We do voc early, we do advisory in A East earlier at 9:20. They get it in before they leave for PM voc. And 3 days a week, which is most of our vocational students, we're doing A East and advisory at 10:20, which they're coming right in the door then. So they're getting A East and advisory 3 times a week. So we did kind of figure out a way. And at first, teachers were like, we've got to remember this little extra glitch. But once we were in it a couple weeks, people got it quickly. They wanted to congratulate us on developing an academic enrichment and support time A East protocols for staff. And this past year, we started on Mondays. Our teachers have probably between 8 and 15 students in their advisory, relatively small groups. But on Monday, they look at grades with each of their students and build a plan for the week. It looks like you might need to go visit your math teacher this week, or I see you were out last week. Do you have any quizzes you need to make up? Should we get you tagged for that? So we're doing a little bit more work on that. And we've continued to grow the advisory, and I mentioned what we've done there. They had a couple of bullets where they talked about communication around the budget process, quarterly parent meetings, quarterly student meetings, quarterly newsletters, and then I do a monthly letter that highlights things going on that month. And I invite all staff in the building, if they have anything they'd like to submit for me to share in that monthly letter. And those are, all of those are very well received. I would say sometimes, I'm going to be honest, that we have a student meeting during AEAST and we have no students come to it. But I do sort of feel strongly our students are good advocates for themselves. They're not afraid to come forward and tell us if there's something going wrong. So we sort of think if we offer a student meeting and they don't arrive, they must be feeling things are going pretty smoothly, or they would be coming to ask questions or raise concerns. But we still do that faithfully every quarter. The parent meeting as well, we've actually had better attendance with the parent meetings while they've been virtual. And I think it's just easier for parents to get to it virtually. If you're busy making dinner and that meeting starts at 6, kids can be eating and you can open your laptop and join us. And so we actually had a good conversation about that this week in our BLT meeting, talking about whether we should keep it that way, just because we have found we have more than twice as many parents attend by doing it virtually. So we'll probably raise that question with the parents, but we'll be open to that if that's how they can come to the meeting, because we'd like them at the meeting. Budget process, I will just mention that starting in January, as we're forming the budget, I put it on the faculty meeting agenda every month so they know what we've asked for, what we've cut. They get a monthly update, and I do think that has helped our staff understand the budget first and foremost a little bit better, but also know where we're at. And I do think one of their confidence pieces that's improved is that they can see now that what they ask for as a department, because in our building, budget begins at the department level, but they can see that whatever we've asked, they have asked for as a department has gone into the budget, and that increases their faith in the whole process. So communication rang through a bunch of those. And the last one I wanted to talk about is that we, in recent years, about 4 years ago, hired a transition specialist for our special services department. And that person focuses solely on post-secondary planning for our students with IEPs and learning needs. And that has been a tremendous addition to the special ed department to have that kind of focus, and those students get that kind of attention. And this year, our transition specialist retired in June, and one of our resource room teachers that has been so thrilled with how that program has worked, he interviewed and became our next transition specialist. So that's great. So I did want to just mention that another part of the letter was the substantive change policy. And that is something that we're required to update NEASC immediately. And I'll just mention a few of the things that would qualify me needing to notify them. The elimination of fine arts, practical arts, or student activities, diminished upkeep or maintenance on facilities, significantly decreased funding, cuts in the level of administrative or support, supervisory staffing, cuts in the number of teachers or guidance counselors if the student population stayed the same, grade level responsibilities of the principal, cuts in the number of support staff, decrease in student services, cuts in educational media staffing, takeover, if we were to be taken over by the state, if there were inordinate user fees that we were using. So those are things I wanted to just mention that tonight, just because as a board who advocates on our budget, that might be ammunition for you. Like, if we don't fund this, NEASC is going to want to know about this because it's a substantive change. So I just wanted to make sure you all knew that we do live under that policy. Moving forward, I just wanted to tell you that the end of the letter talked about our next 10-year decennial visit will be in 2028, not 2027. They've extended us, so we're going to go 11 years between visits this year. I believe really that year change has to do with COVID, and things got so off that they're trying to put things back on a schedule. And so we're going to go 11 years between the visit. And the next accreditation cycle, I just wanted to let everyone know, will really begin in the fall of 2025. And we'll be using the new 2020 NEASC standards. We just barely got under the old set, but there's a whole new set of standards. There are less standards to look at. There's 7 as opposed to the last time we did it, there were 10. So you have to get every professional staff member in the building will need to start doing our self-evaluation work in the fall of 2025. So it's if you have no other takeaway, have the takeaway that NEASC is a never-ending cycle. There's always something coming up next.
Yes, but the good news is that those new standards are significantly more user-friendly.
Yes.
So
Yep.
That's good.
So I hope I did enough of an overview and not too much. Is it?
It was, first off, are there any questions or comments? That was really good, and you should be so proud. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you coming in and explaining it to us. Short of getting, we got the letter as well, but it's great to hear from you what the practicality of it is and what the real day-to-day means.
I would say probably one of the single most things I'm proud of in that building is that in the 4 years I've been there, which as the principal, which most of them have been through COVID, this building has continued to move forward and make gains on things. And we really, as a high school, have not said, well, we're just going to try to maintain status quo. We've set goals each year, 2 building goals, and we've met those each year. And I'm super proud of that because that has been hard work to make that happen. So a big congratulations to everyone at 11 Municipal Drive.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you so much, Sue.
much.
Such impressive work.
Yeah.
Hey, and check this out. I'm gonna do that next slide. The turf is gone. Gone. And if you were to swing by there at some point during today, all of the new turf has been dropped off and is being prepared for installation as we meet here tonight. So I just thought I'd share those pictures publicly. It's very exciting, and everything should be in. The hope is by next month. So here we go.
Yes.
And that ends my report. With help.
All right, so agenda item 7.0 is the chair's report. Next slide, please. Yeah, no, sorry about that. Yeah. So just a couple of updates. This week we held 2 meet and greet sessions for potential board members, and it was really great to meet some of the candidates that came out, and we had some really good conversations about expectations and time commitments and what it would look like to be a board member. So that was really exciting. This is the first time that I know have we done this before? I don't think so. Yeah. This is, and actually kudos to Kristen. This was her idea to do this, just to kind of drum up interest before the November election, because we do have 3 board seats to fill. So 2 full 3-year term seats, and then 1 that is available because of a vacancy that has 1 year left in the term. So this, thank you to Kristen for this really good idea. So yes, it was a lot of fun. Nomination papers are available to be pulled August 3rd. So this is when the fun will start. Yes, with that. So if you're interested in running, or anybody in the public that's interested in running, there's a link at the bottom of the slide that will direct you to the candidates page, our candidacy page for the town. All right. I had 2 other things to say. First, our August workshop, just as a reminder, we have 1 meeting in August. It's Thursday, the 18th. Our workshop that day will be about student safety and crisis response. So that will be, I know that's being worked on, but Jeff and potentially a member of the emergency management team. Did you want to say something?
I think, yeah, we're still planning
Yeah.
that workshop.
Yeah. So that will be August 18th. And then the last thing is just something to put on the radar is we're coming up into the fall again. September, in the September timeframe is when we would, as board members, complete self-evaluations about our year on the board. So those will go out from me. They'll come back to me. I'll kind of, I'll plug them in, and we'll in October meet to discuss the results and really talk about opportunities for improvement as we look toward the next year. All right. Any questions for me? Okay. Agenda item 8.0 are committee reports. So we'll go ahead and start with DEI. I'll take care of that. Alicia is out tonight. So the DEI committee has been meeting through the summer. And one of the things that we've discussed as a board and the DEI committee has now discussed is potentially changing up that chair structure so that the committee really matches really the building steering committee, which is another community, a group with community members that are involved. So what that means is that it's not necessarily a school board member that chairs the committee, rather it's somebody who's on the committee that gets to chair. So we brought the idea back to the DEI committee. They were very excited about it, had a lot of robust discussion around what this would look like, and ultimately came up with a 3-prong approach. So what they have proposed is having a community representative, a staff representative, and a student representative, so that they can share the responsibilities, number one. Number two, you would give the student representative some leadership opportunities. And it would, again, be the staff member really being that conduit back to the admin and to the board, of course, and making it a little bit easier for when we're setting meetings and scheduling those and getting that up and running. So where we are right now, or where the committee is right now, is that they are this week, they will vote on who they want to sit in those seats. And then that at the next meeting, that will, the new chair will take over. So it'll again look just like the building steering committee, where we still have 2 board members who participate. The board members that participate will be the ones that come back and give updates, just like Kristen and Jillian, who give us our building steering committee updates. At the last, so this really took up majority of our last meeting, but if you could go to the next slide. One thing we did have was an opportunity to get some updates on what's happening around the district. So I just wanted to kind of highlight these 2, Wentworth School, and then the Civil Rights Club at the high school. Both gave presentations. So these are some of the things that came out of their update. Wentworth did something that they called Thoughtful Thursdays, and these were student-led Thursday morning announcements, and the students could talk about absolutely anything they wanted to. So there, for example, they have a Ukrainian student who really discussed Ukraine, the culture, the way of life. There, they had a student who thought that it was really great that the janitorial staff had polished the floors, and they thought that was really special. And so they spent their Thoughtful Thursday really thanking the janitorial staff for their work. One of the last ones that they had was a student who talked about the Japanese culture, who's from Japan. So it could be anything they wanted, and students could participate and volunteer as they wanted. They were able to allow every student who asked to volunteer to do it. So that was pretty cool. The homeless remembrance blanket, which if you recall, we saw the video about that, that the students sewed the quilt together, that did go on. Some of our blankets were chosen to go on to DC, if you remember, and were on display there. They did a school-wide read aloud and author visit, and the book was When Stars Are Scattered. And then they did a fundraiser that was connected to Refugee Strong and a local organization that supported refugees. So that was their work. The Civil Rights Club has done a lot of work as well at the high school. They have a representative read aloud that they do with younger students in the district, so that they're really demonstrating. The goal is to demonstrate leadership skills to younger students. So they had that. They created grade specific activities for Indigenous Peoples Day. For example, coloring sheets for the younger grades, worksheets for the middle school grades. So just to really drive home the meaning behind Indigenous Peoples Day. They held their 4th annual voter registration drive, and this one was the most successful they've had to date. So they're very proud about that. Yeah. And then they did design an advisory lesson for the sophomore class. So Sue mentioned that the advisory is specific. They did one that was very specific for that sophomore class this year. It was similar to Monopoly, but what they did was they went through specific things that happen in our society that cause people to suffer, right? To really suffer in life. And so things like incarceration, things like living in poverty, and how do you pay your how do you pay rent when you just don't have the money, right? So it was really a thought-provoking. The exercise was meant to have students really think through these things that we don't always get to experience or think about, right? Homelessness was another one, and how they impact people in the day-to-day. I think that's my last bit. All right, on to Jillian. Well, is there any questions about DEI for me? All right, so we'll go on to Jillian, communications.
So we met on the 7th. We have scheduled meetings, monthly, first Thursday of the month at 11:30. That has shifted around a little bit due to availability of members. And we mostly worked on the upcoming restarting of the Spotlight Awards, and we're really excited to launch that. More to come.
There any questions for Jillian? Is that gonna start, just really quick, are the teachers going to be able to start that? Do we know when they
Well,
can nominate each other?
There will be information going out next month.
Oh, perfect.
And so I think we expect to have something the first month of school.
Oh, very exciting. Thank you. All right, facilities.
In case no one can tell that we're a little bit excited about the turf. Also in my report, with more pictures to come.
Yeah,
but Jeff
sorry
gave-
for stealing your.
Not
thunder
at,
there.
not at all.
I need to read ahead
It is really,
on the slides.
it is really exciting.
It
And
is
I
very
swung down there today and watched them haul off the rolls. It's fun. But like Jeff said, that's on track and we should be good to go. The other thing, so the facilities committee did not meet this past month, but checking in with Todd, I think I mentioned at our last meeting that we started talking about some of the pedestrian safety issues, particularly at the middle school and high school pickup times. So Todd and his team is working with public safety to do some traffic counts and observations when school gets back. And he also mentioned working with the building principals to see if any of the busing and pickup, the COVID protocols that we had in place, if anything's going to go back to normal. So he is working on that, even though we did not get together this month. More pictures. Yeah. You want building committee? You want me? So the building committee, we also had to cancel our June meeting because so many people were on vacation. But since we have last met, there was the site selection community forum on June 6th. The attendance wasn't quite what we would have hoped for, but still a really good presentation. And if anybody wants to see it, it is up on the website. Also super exciting, almost as exciting as the chart, as we have our Facebook page up and running, which I don't want to even undersell that because it feels like a huge milestone to get that page up and going. So now we can start sharing all the information that we have with the community. It's awesome. And if you guys can actually share it and invite your friends to follow it, it would be really helpful. The communications subcommittee for the building committee has met a couple of times. We are still hoping other people will join that committee and various other subcommittees to come, and the email address is up there if anyone is interested and wants to join. The last thing is that Shannon sent over to the council kind of a high level overview, a lot of what's going to be shared on social media in the coming weeks. Just an overview of the project, some preliminary cost estimates that we've seen. And the other thing is that Shannon has reached out to the council chair so that we can get a workshop with them, because we really want the opportunity to show them the tremendous amount of work that has gone into it. You know, the council had a workshop last night with the library, and there's still a couple of counselors that aren't quite where we would like them to be in their engagement with the project. So I think a workshop will really help. Right now, it's tentatively going to happen in the fall. I would like for sooner if possible, just because I think we're ready for it. And we are really excited to share the information that we have. And our next meeting, and our website should be coming in August. And our next meeting will be Tuesday at Blue Point. Anything else you'd like to add?
All right, are there any questions for Kristen? All right, thank you. Finance.
So our finance committee last met on July 14th, and we had discussed the new building project following the discussion from the town council workshop that happened on July 13th, and its budget impacts. And at that time, the entire committee hadn't seen everything yet because the video actually got cut short. It is my understanding now that it is now the whole complete thing is up there now. So everyone kind of needs to catch up at this point. And then we discussed looking to get a new enrollment study, considering the rate at which our town is growing, which would help with planning ahead for our building project and its budget impacts. And we also addressed potential ways that we can grow our capital reserve fund and discuss voting to allocate our year-end surplus to our reserve account at the year-end report in October. So that's the latest update. There hasn't been a whole lot because it's budget season, but that will come soon enough. So.
Okay, any questions? for Jenna? All right, thank you.
That's John's, but I think Monique really well covered it, so.
Crush that.
Perfect. Are there any liaison reports?
As I mentioned, the town council had their workshop last night with the library. There was some brief discussions, but nothing that really pertained to us. They also, the week before, had a workshop with the Downs on their growth management ordinance exemption, which we are tied to that in some capacity, because I think the latest proposal that was out there is there will be, well, potentially, if all of this happens, 25 acres set aside for a school at the Downs. So not that that site has been selected, right? But it's in this proposal. So we're kind of keeping an eye on what the council's doing there too.
Any questions? All right. I think that's it, right? I don't want to, thank you. Agenda item 9.0 is a motion to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056D for the purpose of discussing the administrator's 2022 to 2025 collective bargaining agreement to return to the public session. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Can you remind, since we're reduced, we have to roll call, correct?
Yes, and you have our student representative is online, so,
Okay.
yeah. Ms. Leong,
Here.
Mrs. Lindstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Peony Huff,
Here.
Mrs. Turner,
Yes.
Ms. Bertulia,
Yes.
and Mr. Shumway.
Yes.
All right, we will return in just a few moments. Welcome back. All right, agenda item 10.0 is new business. Agenda item 10.1 is a motion to approve the formation of a joint Scarborough Falmouth girls ice hockey team. Did you want to speak to this before?
I think I need to turn it over potentially to Mr. Legage, who's here this evening to talk a little bit perhaps about the formation of a joint Scarborough Falmouth girls hockey team. I'll turn it over to actually a non-hockey player here to provide some maybe unbiased information about this. Our athletic director, Mike Legage.
I don't look like a hockey player.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
I think, I don't know if you passed on the information, but I had sent some information to Superintendent Bruno, and we are unfortunately not going to be able to support our own girls ice hockey program in the coming year. We had done in March, on about March 25th, I guess, we sent out a survey knowing that our enrollment would likely be pretty low for girls hockey with students coming up. So March 25th, we sent out a survey to 8th graders, freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. And we followed that up with emails, so several correspondence. And the result was 6 students said that they were interested in doing hockey, girls hockey next year. And of that, 2 had never played competitive hockey before, and 4 of them would be considered returning hockey players. So again, we sent several follow-up emails to make sure that maybe people missed it but no, that was the end result. And so within the MPA, Maine Principals Association rules for cooperative teams, I then went out and searched for a school that was interested in taking us. And really what made most sense for us and who would be able to co-op with us under the current MPA rules was Falmouth. And the MPA prefers that schools don't have multiple co-op teams. And so Falmouth was in a situation where they were losing numbers too. They weren't combined with anybody, and it made sense. The struggle for me with it is that we have been very fortunate in Scarborough that up until this past winter, we have not done any co-op teams ever in Scarborough. One year we took some Mount Ararat students for our girls hockey team, but that wasn't because we had to co-op. That's because nobody else would take them. And they kept, from Mount Ararat to Scarborough, they kept asking the schools all along the way, and everybody kept saying no until they asked us, and we said we'd take them. That was maybe 8 years ago or so. And we had 2 girls from Mount Ararat that had joined our team. That was a modified co-op team. It wasn't a true co-op team. And I had gotten permission from the MPA's Interscholastic Management Committee we didn't have to change our name. We didn't have to do all those things that you have to do with a co-op team at the time. So this winter, our first true co-op team ever was wrestling. We hosted that program, and it was our coach, and Gorham was the co-op team for us in wrestling. And I think it was a very good experience. And co-op teams, you have to have a 2-year commitment, and part of when we fill out the forms for the co-op team is we have to say that we have board approval. So I'm certainly recommending we want to continue to try to do hockey and offer that activity. This would be the only way we could do that. The fear is with co-op teams, when you're not the host school, it does make it challenging to get that program back in the future as an individual program. It makes it harder. We won't be the host school for hockey. Falmouth will be the host school. It is a 2-year commitment. I think what makes it harder to get the program back, if you're not like the host school, is that some children don't feel like they're playing for another school and might not sign up, might not be as aggressive about signing up. So there's a little bit of fear there, but it's the only way that we can offer the sport. And they're really the closest next best program for us to co-op with. We may jeopardize our ice time at USM, which would be challenging to get back in the future because I'm sure they'll sell our time to another school. So there's some of those things just to understand how, the downside of the co-op teams. The upside is we can offer the program still to kids. At the end of the day, that's what you want to do, is offer opportunities. And so I'll probably be coming to you again, actually, because we're in the process of trying to work a deal to co-op for alpine skiing with Gorham for this upcoming season. And I've been working on that this summer as well. So it seems that some of these, programs is a little discouraging because I've always been very proud of our participation rate. Our numbers at the high school, though, are going down a little bit. So in proportion, I think we're still going to be in that high 80s, low 90 participation rate for athletics and activities. But the exciting part is the kids will have an opportunity, and I think the Falmouth combo is a really good fit for us. We wouldn't provide transportation. Kids would have to get there on their own. They run everything out of the Falmouth Ice Arena and Falmouth Family Ice, it's called. And then the Casco Bay Ice Arena, which is really across the parking lot from Falmouth Family Ice. Those are the two facilities they use, and everything runs out of that facility. Even when there's hockey games that they're going to, away games, the buses leave from the ice arena because they have their own locker room there and they keep all their gear there and those things. I think we're going to look at freezing the booster account and looking to see if parents that are interested in being involved in boosters would join the Falmouth booster group and, support that program. And then when we're able to perhaps rebuild our program and have that interest, those resources would be there to restart a new booster. And so that's what we would be looking to do. Those are some kind of in the weed things, but those would be some of the things that would be a shift for us. But like I said, it's all new for us. Scarborough has not been a school that's actually been allowed under the MPA rules to co-op with other schools, but the MPA over the years has loosened some of those rules with some sports. One of the rules with the MPA is that you can't co-op with a school that if you put the two schools together, the school enrollment would be larger than the largest school in the state. And so because of our school enrollment, we haven't had the opportunity to co-op, but MPA has loosened those rules a little bit for some sports so that schools can keep the sports going. Because everybody has seen a decrease in participation rates. So athletic training services Falmouth would be the host school, so everything would be done through Falmouth. So the whole program would really be kind of a Falmouth driven program. And our athletic trainers would support anything. If our kids got a concussion or something, then our kids could do their return to play progression, for example, with our athletic trainers before they went back. But really, the whole program would be Falmouth driven. They would be the host school. Just like with wrestling, we're the host school. And like I said, it is a 2-year commitment. Right now, there's no fancy name. It would be Falmouth Scarborough would be the team name. Falmouth just purchased brand new girls ice hockey uniforms. And so the plan is for now to maybe somehow add a emblem or something to the current uniforms instead of purchasing brand new uniforms. There would be some expense for us, certainly. And we're still kind of working out those details, but it would certainly be less than if it was our own program. They have offered our varsity head coach to join their staff. If she chooses to do that, I don't believe she will. And we would not offer a contract to the assistant coaches. So again, it would be the Falmouth coaches that would, because of they're the host school, they would coach the team. Other than that, I think I'm just kind of scanning my notes, but I think that's probably it, unless you had questions.
I'll just say that I appreciate you working out an avenue so that the students still can participate.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you. for
Yep. That's the ultimate goal. We always want to have our own programs, I think, but I think if we can, like we did with cheering, when cheering numbers were low, we tried to offer something to, so the kids have those experiences. So I think that's the most important thing. So.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the formation of a joint Scarborough Falmouth girls ice hockey team?
So moved. Second.
Is there any discussion? Can we call the vote, please?
If everyone's in person, you can.
Oh,
just
now we
raise your
can.
hand.
All right. All in favor of approving the formation? All right, thank you. Okay, I'm going to bundle agenda item 10.2, 10.3, 10.4, 10.5, and 10.6. These are the meeting minutes of May 19th, 2022, June 2nd, 2022, June 9th, 2022, the workshop on June 16th, 2022, and the business meeting on June 16th, 2022. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. All right, agenda item 10.7 is a motion to approve the 2022-2023 superintendent's goals. And these were the goals that we worked on at our workshop. So we had worked through those 5 goals. As a reminder, the goal 1 is to revise and communicate Scarborough's strategic plan. Goal 2 I'm not going to read through all of the under points for you, but the first goal is revise and communicate Scarborough's strategic plan. The Scarborough Schools community will contribute to developing a shared vision for how we continually strengthen our learning organization and impact the development of our learners K through 12. Goal 2 is to guide the development of the unique abilities and interests of all students. Goal 3 is to promote and grow a district-wide culture of trust, inclusion, and collaboration. Goal 4 is to collaborate with the town council and town staff to align school growth needs with other department expansion or development projects. Goal 5 is to strengthen student success, achievement, and well-being through ongoing development in all subject areas, district-wide student support opportunities, social emotional learning, and district-wide DEI work. So do I have a motion to approve the superintendent's goals as presented?
So moved.
Second?
Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor of approving? All right, thank you. Agenda item 10.8 are appointments. So I'll turn this over to Jeff.
All right, first appointment, excuse me, for this evening is our middle school social worker. Berkeley Nappy has been nominated to fill this newly created position. Ms. Nappy received her Bachelor's of Science degree from USM and her Master's in Clinical Mental Health Counseling from Goddard College in Vermont. She's been a mental health clinician since 2014. For 4 years, she was a school mental health counselor at Laringer Memorial School in Old Orchard Beach. Currently, she is a Spurwink clinical consultant for DHHS.
Do I have a motion to approve the middle school social worker?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor? All right. Perfect. 10.8.2 is the Wentworth School classroom teacher.
Yes, this is a one-year position. Molly Brennerman has been nominated to fill this position created by a one-year leave of absence. Ms. Brennerman received both her Bachelor of Arts degrees and her Master's degree from USM. She was a Building Ed Tech 3 for 1 year at Wentworth School, and this past year, she was a third grade teacher at Oxford Cumberland Canal School.
Do I have a motion to approve the Wentworth School classroom teacher for one-year position?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? 10.8.3 is the middle school STEM teacher.
Craig Hansen has been selected to fill this position created by resignation. Mr. Hansen obtained his Bachelor's of Science degree in Wildlife Ecology from the University of Maine, where he also earned his Master's of Arts in Teaching degree. He began his teaching career as a science teacher at Windham High School. He has also been a science teacher at Orono High School, as well as a middle school teacher for 1 year at the Shenzhen American International School in China. Mr. Hansen was the assistant principal at Leonard Middle School in Orono, and most recently, the assistant principal at King Middle School in Portland.
Do I have a motion to approve the middle school STEM teacher?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? All right. Agenda item 10.8.4 is a middle school band teacher.
So Rachel Williams has been chosen to fill this position created by resignation. Ms. Williams earned her bachelor's degree in music education from the University of New Hampshire and anticipates receiving her master's degree in May 2023 from Kent State University. She's been a music teacher in the Wyndham Raymond School Department, and for the last 5 years was the instrumental music and general music teacher at Mount Ararat Middle School.
Do I have a motion to approve the middle school band teacher?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Right. 10.8.5 is the middle school support content area teacher.
Ethan McGill has been selected to fill this position created by resignation. What'd I do? Received his Bachelor's of Arts degree in psychology from Eastern University in Pennsylvania. Mr. McGill was an individual instructor and a therapeutic integration instructor at Trellis Services in Maryland. He was also a crisis intervention specialist at the Linwood Center in Maryland. For 1 year, he was a behavioral health professional with the Biddeford School Department, and for the last 5 years has been a special education case manager at Massabesic Middle School.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the middle school student support content area teacher?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? 10.8.6 is the Pleasant Hill School physical education teacher.
Alexandra Spark has been nominated to fill this position created by a realignment. Ms. Spark earned her bachelor's degree in health and exercise science from the College of New Jersey and her master's degree in sports management and athletic administration from Southern New Hampshire University. She was recently a physical education teacher at Sakarapa Elementary School in Westbrook.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the Pleasant Hill School physical education teacher?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? All right. And then last but certainly not least, 10.8.7 is a K2 school counselor.
Oh, man, you had the phonetic pronunciation for this last one written on the What do we? Zeman, I think it's Zeman. I think I remember that. Molly Zeman has been selected to fill this new position. She received her Bachelor's of Arts degree from Hamilton College and her Master of Social Work from Boston College. She was a special education social worker in Cape Elizabeth Middle School, and for the last 3 years has been a behavioral interventionist RTI coordinator for the Lewiston Public Schools.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the K2 school counselor?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? All right, thank you. Agenda item 10.9 is the first reading of policy JICA, student dress. So to give you a little bit of background on this, the policy that we currently have hasn't been looked at, hasn't been revised since 2013. So what happened is it was on our list to be looked at, and at the same time we had some students that came asked to actually speak to the policy committee about the dress code and how there were changes that they believed would benefit the district. So the overarching message that we heard from the kids is that, first off, the policy isn't necessarily enforced the same across the district. So what is occurring at the middle school might be different than what's at the high school. The second thing that came up was the idea that if parents and students should be responsible for their own dress. So that was a big area of concern from the students. And then the third was that some of the items that were listed in the dress code very much seemed to single out the female student population versus the male student population. And it wasn't perceived as equitable between the male and female students. So we've spent 2 months on this, really working through it. So the draft policy you have in front of you is where we landed. Keeping in mind the things that we heard and the things that we've discussed with the students, where we ended up is that we, and of course, looking at the draft model policy, we wanted to keep things fairly easy to follow, easier for the teachers, and still maintain the items that would not be acceptable within schools. So what you see is items that are prohibited as it relates to clothing, footwear, and accessories, and there's four areas there. And then, of course, physical education, certain, extra special clothing can be required for that, but we would not require branding on that special clothes. So this would be the first reading. So do I have a motion to approve the first reading of policy JICA?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
I have a bunch of questions. I think the first one, and I don't know, this might be nitpicky, but the first one specifically called out that footwear had to be worn at school, and the new policy does not indicate that footwear has to be worn to school. I also was wondering if you could give a little more context to the hat conversation, because I had heard various things as to why hats were not allowed in the original policy, but I was wondering if there was staff feedback on that, or like why that was ever in there in the first place.
I don't know why it was in there in the first place. This policy was initially written and adopted in 2003. So it's unfortunately before any of our times. Would you have even heard about this, Diane? Yeah, I don't, and I've heard, like you, Kristen, I have heard various reasons, the distraction reason, the potential to cover the face reason. Ultimately, I think we had some discussion in policy about this, and I think ultimately where we landed is we're asking students to be responsible for themselves, their clothing, their choices. And so this would just be an extension of that. So if the intent is for them to wear a hat because hats are in style now as part of an outfit, We did hear that from students as well, right? That like, sometimes when students are putting their outfits together, the hat is like an accessory, like a piece of that, right? So if they're going to be responsible for, doing that, they're also responsible for their behavior with the hat at the school.
And there were also cultural concerns brought up. It was excellent testimony by the students. I can't say enough.
Yeah.
So impressed.
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful. They came and spoke.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I mean, there were a number of concerns that,
Mhm.
you know, and you said at the beginning that not necessarily followed evenly. And anyway, I thought that the one kid made a really good point about that.
Yeah, his point was, you know, if they're responsible enough to wear them at high school, why are they not responsible enough at just a few years below to wear them?
I'm fine having hats in school as
Mhm.
long as the staff is okay with it.
Have you heard any? Do you think that there would be any?
Going on the hat thing.
Yeah.
Or the policy in general, as long as the staff is okay with this, the whole revision to it.
Yeah, you know. I think as far as staff concerned, usually it's about making sure it's an appropriate policy and that it's clear what's expected and what we should be enforcing. So.
Okay. Should I keep going?
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
On C, when I looked back at the old policy, I think I prefer the old language, and I'm wondering why you guys took it out where it says, the school administration has the authority to prohibit other logos, pictures, or messages which they determine to be in violation of the board's non-discrimination or harassment policies. I think I like referring back to those policies. Was there a reason that you guys didn't want that in there? I think that was, sorry, I think that we felt that was covered in the other, like A through D, but I'm not opposed to that language being in there.
Yeah, and I think we also thought it was covered in the second paragraph where it talks about the non-discriminatory environment for education. But again, I definitely think that's something we can bring back and ask or talk about again. What's the language? I'll just make a note.
The last thing I had on there, and it's a concern with the last paragraph where it says the superintendent is responsible for the development of any administrative procedures to implement it. And I guess one of the issues I think with the policy in the first place was the inconsistency of it. And I worry that this feels very open-ended. And how are students going to know what the consequences are? Like, how will that be communicated? And will that be like it's going to look different, I'm assuming, at each phase level, but I guess I just worry about how open-ended that is. And it feels like there should be some predictability for the students to know what the outcome is if they violate the policy.
Oh, so maybe like the language on the old policy that talks about there will be a warning, then there will be sent home.
Yeah.
So like kind of keeping in line with that language.
Something predictable, like this just feels a little, like, I don't know what the consequences are for, and I know it's not our job to implement the policies, but just some consistency and predictability to it, I think, some language. Yeah. Yeah. I thought we did have something in there about, sorry. About the student handbook, but I don't know. All right. That was it.
That was it.
Yeah.
Well, I think these are all great and I will bring them back. So our next policy meeting, we're still negotiating a date on that, but it will be before our next meeting. So then we can have some answers and have some more discussion at that meeting. For sure. And then I just want to end and say, like Jillian, I was really impressed. We had, I think 4 kids come to our policy meeting and they all were very passionate about this and very really, I think gave us all some really good food for thought on why we should be considering these changes. So it was a really great meeting. So definitely kudos to the kids for doing that as well. It's difficult sometimes to do that. So it was really good of them.
I like how it's more broadly written now. So it allows for all of our kids to kind of really express their own identity, and especially with DEI, just so prevalent right now. I think it's really a lot more inclusive. So I like that. And I think I agree with you, Kristen, to just kind of have a statement on just like what the infractions would be, just so that they have some clear understanding of what would happen if any of those things are violated.
I just wanted to add, as a student, it's so cool to see that it's finally being implemented or like thought about, because I remember being in 8th grade and everyone was so frustrated that like, I think it was a rule then that we couldn't wear like shorts above our fingertips. And it was always like, why can it be like 9th grade I can do that, but 8th I can't? And it's so nice to see that going away.
It's funny you say that because one of the students that came, that was actually her comment, because running shorts, she's a runner, and running shorts are inherently made shorter for the purpose of running, right? And so she, that was exactly one of the points that she made as well.
Yeah, I hope all the kids walk away with the lesson that their voice matters, right? And
Yeah.
they can change things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so do I have a motion to approve the first reading of the policy JICA? Of course, we're going to bring back these questions. I think we still have to vote on the first reading. Yeah. So do I have a motion to approve the first reading of policy JICA with the questions?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor? All right, thank you. Agenda item 10.0 is a motion to approve the administrator's 2022-2025 collective bargaining agreement. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor? Thank you. And then agenda item 11.0 is a motion to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056D for the purpose of discussing the professional staff 2022 to 2025 collective bargaining agreement, not to return to public session. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion?